The Most Dangerous Game. By Richard Connell, 1893 to 1949. Off there to the right somewhere is a large island, said Whitney. It's rather a mystery. What island is it? Rainsford asked. The old maps call it Shipwrecked Island, Whitney replied. A suggestive name, isn't it? Sailors have a curious dread of the place. I don't know why. Some superstition. I can't see it, remarked Rainsford, trying to peer through the humid tropical night that was tangible as it pressed its thick warm blackness in upon the yacht. You've good eyes, said Whitney, with a laugh, and I've seen you shooting a moose moving in the bush at 400 yards, but even you can't see 4 miles through a moonless Caribbean night. Nor 4 yards, admitted Rainsford. Ugh. It's like moist black velvet. It will be light enough in Rio, promised Whitney. We should arrive there in a few days. I hope the Jaguar guns have come from Putty's. We should have some good hunting up the Amazon. Great sport, hunting. The best sport in the world, agreed Rainsford. For the hunter, added Whitney. Not for the Jaguar. Don't talk stupid, Whitney, said Rainsford. You're a big game hunter, not a philosopher. Who cares how a jaguar feels? Perhaps the jaguar feels, answered Whitney. Bah! They've no understanding. Even so, I think they understand one thing: fear. The fear of pain and the fear of death. Nonsense, laughed Rainsford. This hot weather is making you soft. Whitney. Be a realist. The world is made up of 2 classes: the hunters and the hunts. Luckily, you and I are hunters. Do you think we've passed that island yet? I can't tell in the dark. I hope so. Why? Asked Rainsford. The place has a reputation, a bad one. Cannibals, suggested Rainsford. Hardly. Even cannibals would not live in such a godforsaken place. But it's gotten into sailor lore, somehow. Didn't you notice that the crews are a bit nervous today? Yes, they were a bit strange. Even Captain Nielsen. Yes, even that tough-minded old man, who'd go up to the devil himself and ask him for a light. Those fishy blue eyes held a look I never saw there before. All I could get out of him was, this place has an evil name among seafaring men, sir. Then he said to me, very gravely, don't you feel anything? As if the air about us was actually poisonous. Now, you mustn't laugh when I tell you this. I did feel something like a sudden chill. There was no breeze. The sea was as flat as a glass window. We were drawing near the island then. What I felt was a mental chill, a sort of sudden fear. Pure imagination, said Rainsford. One superstitious sailor can taint the whole ship's company with his fear. Maybe. But sometimes I think sailors have an extra sense that tells them when they are in danger. Sometimes I think evil is a tangible thing with wavelengths. An evil place can broadcast vibrations of evil. Anyhow, I'm glad we're getting out of this zone. Well, I think I'll go inside now, Rainsford. I'm not sleepy, said Rainsford. I'm going to smoke another pipe up on the afterdeck. Good night, Rainsford. See you at breakfast. Right. Good night, Whitney. There was no sound in the night as Rainsford sat there but the sound of the engine that drove the yacht swiftly through the darkness, and the swish of the wash of the propeller. Rainsford, bending in a steamer chair, lazily puffed on his favorite briar. The drowsiness of the night was on him. It's so dark, he thought, that I could sleep without closing my eyes. The night would be my eyelids. A sudden sound startled him. Off to the right he heard it, and his ears, expert in such matters, could not be mistaken. Again he heard the sound, and again. Somewhere, off in the blackness, someone had fired a gun 3 times. Rainsford jumped up and moved quickly to the rail, mystified. He strained his eyes in the direction from which the sound had come, but it was like trying to see through a blanket. He leaped upon the rail and balanced himself there, to get greater elevation. His pipe, striking a rope, was knocked from his mouth. He jumped for it. A short cry came from his lips as he realized he had reached too far and had lost his balance. The cry was pinched off short as the blood-warm waters of the Caribbean Sea dosed over his head. He struggled up to the surface and tried to cry out, but the wash from the speeding yacht slapped him in the face and the salt water in his open mouth made him gag and strangle. Desperately he struck out with strong strokes after the receding lights of the yacht, but he stopped before he had swum 50 feet. A certain cool-headedness had come to him. It was not the first time he had been in a tight place. There was a chance that his cries could be heard by someone aboard the yacht, but that chance was weak and grew weaker as the yacht raced on. He wrestled himself out of his clothes and shouted with all his power. The lights of the yacht became faint and then they were blotted out entirely by the night. Rainsford remembered the shots. They had come from the right, and he swam in that direction, swimming with slow, deliberate strokes, keeping his strength. For a seemingly endless time he fought the sea. He began to count his strokes. He could do possibly 100 more, and then Rainsford heard a sound. It came out of the darkness, a high screaming sound, the sound of an animal in an extremity of anguish and terror. He did not recognize the animal that made the sound. He did not try to. With fresh vitality he swam toward the sound. He heard it again, then it was cut short by another noise, crisp, staccato. "Pistol shot," muttered Rainsford, swimming on. 10 minutes of determined effort brought another sound to his ears, the most welcome he had ever heard, the muttering and growling of the sea breaking on a rocky shore. He was almost on the rocks before he saw them. On a night less calm he would have been shattered against them. With his remaining strength he dragged himself from the waters. He forced himself upward, hand over hand. He reached a flat place at the top. Dense jungle came down to the very edge of the cliffs. What perils that tangle of trees and underbrush might hold for him did not concern Rainsford just then. All he knew was that he was safe from his enemy, the sea, and that fatigue was on him. He flung himself down at the jungle edge and fell into the deepest sleep of his life. When he opened his eyes he knew from the position of the sun that it was late in the afternoon. Sleep had given him new energy, a sharp hunger was picking at him. He looked about him, almost cheerfully. Where there are pistol shots, there are men. Where there are men, there is food, he thought. But what kind of men, he wondered, in such a forbidding place? He saw no sign of a trail through the closely knit web of weeds and trees. It was easier to go along the shore, and Rainsford struggled along by the water. Not far from where he landed, he stopped. Some wounded thing by the evidence, a large animal had beaten about in the underbrush, the jungle weeds were crushed down and the moss was torn up. A small, glittering object not far away caught Rainsford's eye and he picked it up. It was an empty cartridge. "A .22, he remarked. "That's odd. It must have been a fairly large animal too. The hunter had a hard time to tackle it with a light gun. It's clear that the animal put up a fight. I suppose the first 3 shots I heard was when the hunter flushed his hunt and wounded it. The last shot was when he trailed it here and finished it." He examined the ground closely and found what he had hoped to find, the print of hunting boots. They pointed along the cliff in the direction he had been going. Eagerly he hurried along. Night was beginning to settle down on the island. Depressive darkness was blacking out the sea and jungle when Rainsford saw the lights. He came upon them, and his first thought was that he had come upon a village, for there were many lights. But as he went along he saw to his great astonishment that all the lights were in one enormous building, a tall building with pointed towers plunging upward into the gloom. His eyes made out the shadowy outlines of a palatial castle. It was set on a high bluff, and on 3 sides of it cliffs dived down to where the sea licked greedy lips in the shadows. Mirage, thought Rainsford. But it was no mirage, he found, when he opened the tall iron gate. The stone steps were real enough, the massive door with a knocker was real enough, yet above it all hung an air of unreality. He lifted the knocker and he let it fall, and it startled him with its booming loudness. He thought he heard steps within, the door remained closed. Again Rainsford lifted the heavy knocker, and let it fall. The door opened then and Rainsford stood blinking in the gold light that poured out. The first thing Rainsford saw was the largest man Rainsford had ever seen, a gigantic creature, solidly made and black-bearded to the waist. In his hand the man held a long-barreled revolver, and he was pointing it straight at Rainsford's heart. "Don't be alarmed," said Rainsford, with a smile which he hoped was disarming. "I'm no robber. I fell off a yacht. My name is Sanger Rainsford of New York City." The menacing look in the eyes did not change, the revolver pointing as rigidly as if the giant were a statue. He gave no sign that he understood Rainsford's words, or that he had even heard them. He was dressed in uniform, a black uniform trimmed with grey astrakhan. "I'm Sanger Rainsford of New York," Rainsford began again. "I fell off a yacht. I am hungry." The man's only answer was to raise with his thumb the hammer of his revolver. Then Rainsford saw the man's free hand go to his forehead in a military salute, and he saw him click his heels together and stand at attention. Another man was coming down the broad marble steps, an erect, slender man in evening clothes. He came toward Rainsford and held out his hand. He said, "It is a very great pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Sanger Rainsford, the celebrated hunter, to my home." Automatically Rainsford shook the man's hand. "I've read your book about hunting snow leopards in Tibet, you see," explained the man. "I am General Zaroff." Rainsford's first impression was that the man was handsome. His second impression was that there was an original, almost bizarre quality about the general's face. He was a tall man past middle age, for his hair was a vivid white, but his thick eyebrows and pointed military mustache were as black as the night from which Rainsford had come. His eyes, too, were black and very bright. He had high cheekbones, a sharp nose, a dark face, the face of a man used to giving orders, the face of an aristocrat. Turning to the giant in uniform, the general made a sign. The giant put away his pistol, saluted, withdrew. "Ivan is an incredibly strong man," remarked the general, "but he has the misfortune to be deaf and dumb. A simple fellow, but, I'm afraid, like all his race, a bit of a savage." "Is he Russian?" "He is a Cossack," said the general, and his smile showed red lips and pointed teeth. "So am I." "Come," he said, "we shouldn't be chatting here. We can talk later. Now you want clothes, food, rest. You shall have them. This is a most restful spot." Ivan had reappeared, and the general spoke to him with lips that moved but gave forth no sound.